Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Hope you're all having a great morning. I know for me, it's quite beautiful out here. I'm grateful that the program is now when we have this nice snow-capped area behind me. So as people start trickling in, I'm going to launch a poll just to see who of you all have been here before and who hasn't. This program is being recorded and it's also being live streamed on YouTube. So if you're watching from YouTube, welcome from that platform. You will not be able to participate in the poll per se, but I still want you to comment what you think, what your opinions are when I launch a poll, all right? I'm gonna go ahead and launch the poll. The question is, have you ever been to Calaveras Big Trees State Park before? Yes, no, or maybe. Now, I know some of you might be doing this in your classrooms where you only have like one of you attending per se. So if you can just kind of get a nice vote from your class all together, and then you can put either yes, no, or maybe, depending on majority, that works well for me, okay? And I like to do polls during these sessions so I can kind of make sure y'all are still with me. And it's more fun, so we can be a little bit interactive. So go ahead and vote in the poll if you can. And if you are tuning in through YouTube or any other service, go ahead and just put in the chat if you've ever been to Calaveras Big Trees State Park before. And I'll get this program started in maybe about 2 or so minutes, just to make sure everyone who signed up is here, okay? In the meantime, as you all are voting, I'm gonna turn this camera around here so you can see how nice the park is today. We had just about an inch of snow last night, and we haven't had any since. It's about 19 degrees right now. I'm all bundled up, so I'm okay, but it is quite chilly. And we're actually supposed to get multiple feet of snow over the next couple days, starting this afternoon. So this is absolutely perfect timing for our program like this. Okay? So again, I'll get started in just about a minute. A couple more people are tuning in. There's the poll going right now. I'm curious to see how many of you have ever been to Calaveras Big Tree State Park before. Yes, no, or maybe. If you're tuning in on YouTube, you can just put that in the chat. And I'll get started in just a little bit. And I'll explain exactly how this webinar will go. All right? So I'll give you all about 1 more minute also to answer the poll. All right, another maybe 20 more seconds to answer the poll, and then I'm going to go ahead and get started officially. All right, we're ending the poll, and I'll show the results. And not a lot of you participated, but that's okay. It looks like it's a 50-50 split for who's been to the park and who hasn't been to the park. All right, that's pretty impressive. Usually most people attend these things that have never been here before. So those who haven't been here before, welcome back. Those who haven't, welcome. And for those of you who've been putting it in the YouTube chat also, either welcome back or welcome overall. So let's go ahead and officially get started. My name is Lillie, and today I am coming to you live from Calaveras Big Tree State Park. And yes, this is real, snow behind me. We're expecting to get multiple feet the next few days. So this is absolutely perfect conditions for today. And I'm telling you all about the giant sequoia during today's program. During the program, I will be using the polls. So I'd like you to vote if you can for, whatever sort of things I might be asking you. That's just a good way for me to see, what you all are feeling. And I will be answering questions using the Q&A, but only at the very end, okay? And I do that because I might be answering your question along the way. And I won't have a ton of time allotted for the Q&A at the end. This is about a 45-minute program. So maybe about 5 minutes or so at the end, I'll go through some Q&As and see if there's some questions I haven't already answered during my program. So if you want to be strategic, you want to make sure I answer your question, wait until the very end of the program, because then it's more likely I will see your question and answer it than if you ask it, 10 minutes in. I'm not going to be looking at the Q&A at all during that time. Not until the very end, okay? And this program is being live streamed on YouTube, and it is also being recorded right now as well. I will not be looking at the raised hand buttons, so we're not going to use participation that way. There's too many of you to be able to do that. But again, I will be using the polls to try to interact with you a little bit, okay? So I told you I'm at Calaveras Big Tree State Park, and my name is Lillie. And that gives you a little bit of information for where I am, right? You might be able to guess there's snow around, so it has to be a pretty cold area in California. But California is a big state. If you just narrow it down to, okay, well, where is it kind of cold right now? It's a pretty big area. So I pulled up where I am on Google Maps, and I'm going to share my screen right now so you can see it. And this is a nice zoomed in Google Maps, right? If you happen to know the park, you'll know that I'm right by the visitor center, but let's zoom it out a fair bit. Maybe now you start to recognize things. Maybe you know of like Dorrington, maybe you know of Bear Valley. You can see that in the corner right now. Maybe you like to go skiing there. Let's keep zooming out here. There's some Sacramento, San Francisco, and now you can tell that I am in the middle kind of California, but I am close to the border of Nevada. Now, because I'm close to the border of Nevada, that means that I am in the Sierra Nevada mountains that helps divide our two states. Now, I'm not super close to it. I'm not like, Lake Tahoe. So that means I'm not way, way high up. If that was the case, it'd be colder than about 19 degrees and there'd be a lot more snow. But I'm in what's called the foothills, about 5,000 feet elevation, near the bottom of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I give you that not just to give you context to where I am, but also to explain why we have giant sequoias, which this program is all about today. Giant sequoias are very, very picky trees. They are only found in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, specifically the western slope of the foothills of Sierra Nevada mountains, where I am right now. So that means they're only found in roughly this squiggle right there. That's it. They're not found naturally anywhere else on Earth. They're very, very picky trees. Now, I do say naturally because there have been people in the past and people in the present that have gone a giant sequoia seed. They haven't taken it out of the park. You're not supposed to do that, but maybe they acquired one from some other way and planted it, and that tree is done okay, or maybe it's currently doing all right. So it's possible for them to live elsewhere, but naturally they're only found in that range, in the squiggle I just did there. So we're pretty lucky to have these trees in California, pretty lucky to have a big, big tree. You might have guessed, I'm called Calaveras Big Tree State Park. These are called giant sequoias. These trees are literally a big deal. They are the biggest individual trees to have ever lived, okay? And trees can be a whole lot bigger than animals, for example. So I want everyone to close their eyes and picture the biggest animal they know of. Maybe it's a kind of dinosaur, maybe it's an elephant. Technically, the very biggest animal ever is the blue whale. So if you know how big a blue whale is, picture that. And now I want you to picture 10 blue whales, okay? That's how overall massive a giant sequoia can be. Its weight can be more than 10 blue whales. That's over 1,000 tons. And 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. So again, massive trees. Now this tree behind me right here, that's all covered in snow, this is not the biggest one ever. We don't have that one here in Calaveras Big Tree State Park. It's found in another park called Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park. It was in the more southern part of the map. So if you're living kind of more in the Los Angeles area, it's actually not too far away from where you are. But this is the biggest one that I also have internet connection to. That's also still alive. So it works pretty well for this sort of thing. So I'm going to walk right up to this tree here and show you how wide it is. But the only reason why I can do that with this tree is because it's actually right along a trail. If you see a really cool tree that's off the trail, we do not want you to approach it. We want you to stay on the trail. If you go off the trail, you can trample down on some plants you can't quite see, trample down on some roots that are underground. There might be an animal burrowing under there. So even when there's snow, we want you to stay on the trail. So this tree, right along the trail. So I'm gonna walk right up to it here and stretch out my arms. And as you can see, I mean, I'm not even close to stretching across this whole tree, right? It would take maybe 2 of me to stretch across it, maybe 6 of me to go all the way around it. That's pretty big. But again, this isn't the biggest one ever. The biggest one ever is about 40 feet across. To give you some context, my wingspan, so from fingertip to fingertip, is about 5 feet. So if you want to do a little bit of quick math, that means it would take 8 of me to stretch across the very widest giant sequoia. Now, at the end of today, we're going to see the remains of what was the biggest giant sequoia in this forest that can give you kind of a sense for just how big they can get. So they're heavy, they're wide, they're also very tall. You need to add all those components together to get the claim to fame of the very biggest tree. So let's see how tall this giant sequoia is. Now, since we have some snow, it's a little hard to tell where the giant sequoia stops. So you can add maybe half a foot, so a few inches to this bottom here. And now let's go all the way to the top. You can see some other trees right next to it. They're already not as tall as this giant sequoia. All right, we made it. The very tallest giant sequoias can be over 300 feet tall. Okay, so we got 300 feet tall up to that, about 40 feet across, and over 1,000 tons. That's how you get the biggest tree. But I mean, how do you get the biggest tree? You know what I mean? How can something grow so big? Well, I always like to, at this point, take a couple steps back. If you're thinking of a really overwhelming question like that, it's helpful to start at the beginning with what you know and build off of that and try to find some logic. So, okay, everything needs to grow to get bigger. Trees are plants. Plants need 3 really key things to grow to photosynthesize and make their own food, more specifically. They need water, they need air, specifically the carbon dioxide we breathe out, and they need sun. Those are the 3 really key ingredients to photosynthesize, aka make their own food. So they need that. Giant sequoias in particular, they like to have some good soil, and they like to have a lot of space in their soil. And they actually also very specifically like the sun. Some plants are a bit more like, I prefer the shade, I don't want direct sun. Giant sequoias are all about that sun. One of the reasons why they grow so tall is to get past all the other trees. And once they've done that, they stop growing taller. They say, I'm good, I'm at 275 feet up. I don't need to break any records. I'm just gonna stay right here. And now I'm gonna grow wider after that. So the first priority is reach the sun because they love the sun so much. Afterwards is when they get really fat. So in general, giant sequoias, if they're skinny but tall, they're pretty young. If they're getting pretty wide, they have to be pretty old. So we have all those components in terms of how they can get to be so big. There's also one other one, and I kind of just mentioned it. It's time. They also need time to get really huge, to get to be one of the biggest things ever. Every year they're alive, as long as they have everything they need, they will just keep growing and growing and growing. That's different from us. We will eventually all stop growing. But giant sequoias, they can live and grow for over 3,200 years. Okay. So if you know a little bit of human history, that means that the very oldest giant sequoia started growing from its seed. So by that, I can call it germinating, if you want to be very sciencey, started germinating during the end of the ancient Egyptian empire. So if you've heard of the pharaohs, the Sphinx, the pyramids and all that, this tree was a little sapling when that empire was starting to fall. And it was still living and growing then during the entire rest of human history. So we're talking the Romans with chariot races. We're talking Vikings with their sailing adventures. We're talking famous paintings and sculptures you might see in a museum. And it's still living and growing today. And honestly, this is the oldest we've found a giant sequoia so far. There might be one even older than that. But this explains how they can get to be so big. If we could live and grow for over 3,200 years, we would be really huge too, right? But we can't. We only live, 100 years if you're really lucky and you're fit and all that good stuff. So that means giant sequoias need to have something special. They need to have some adaptations in order to handle living that long. And an adaptation is any sort of characteristic or trait. So it could be a permanent thing, like humans, we have our thumbs. It could be a temporary thing that's also a behavior. So maybe something like migration, if you've heard of that. Lots of animals migrate to find food or to get away from bad weather. It could be anything like that that helps a living thing. So animals, plants, fungi, what have you, survive. So live every day and thrive. So live really well in their environment, whether it's a snowy area, a desert, the ocean, what have you. Okay, it's a very broad definition. So we're going to zoom in very specifically with the giant sequoia. And one adaptation that's kind of layered for a giant sequoia is its bark. Okay, so this is a nice up close look at the bark. You can see it's this really nice reddish color. Giant sequoias are considered part of the redwood subfamily. So that means they're direct relatives of the coast redwood, which maybe some of you have heard before. The coast redwood is the tallest tree ever, tallest living thing ever. Doesn't have the claim to fame of being the biggest tree though, because the giant sequoia is a lot wider, but they're basically brothers and sisters. They're part of that redwood subfamily. And this red is really key for the coast redwood and also the giant sequoia's survival. This red color tastes disgusting. It comes from a group of chemicals called tannins. That's Tannins, tannins. Doesn't matter so much, but what matters is that they're very, very bitter. They're found in small amounts in cocoa powder, in dark chocolate, in black tea. Things that when you eat it, it's kind of an acquired taste, or maybe you just have to immediately add some sugar or cream something to it so it doesn't taste too gross. So now imagine you're an insect and you're chewing away on this bark and you have taste buds. You're going to say, no, thank you. This is gross. I want to chew on like one of these trees over here that do not have this gross red color. And it's really successful, giant sequoia, at repelling insects because of this gross bark. Now, some insects do impact the tree, but a lot of them don't, or at least they don't as much as other trees. If there's enough insects bombarding a tree, that can either weaken the tree so much that's more likely to die from something else, or it could outright kill a tree. That doesn't happen very often with the giant sequoias. This tannin, this red color, also actually repels fungi. So fungi include things like mushrooms. And some mushrooms are super helpful for plants overall. There are some that grow on the roots of plants and actually make the roots bigger and help the roots communicate with each other. But some of the ones, especially on the outside of the tree, can actually spread disease. So the fact that this bark, this tannins, repels all the kind of mushrooms and other fungi that might grow on top of the outside of a tree means that it's less likely for this tree to get diseases or any other bad stuff that might come along with it. So we already have, it's just this one thing, insects that don't usually impact the tree and fungi that don't usually impact the tree. Those are two really big groups that can kill a tree. So we have that. There's one other component of the bark I want to talk about, and that's simply how thick it is. Now, it's not all the way to the top of the tree, but it's just down low. The bark of a giant sequoia can be 2 feet thick, okay? That's the length of my arm. Now, the bark is the outermost layer of the tree, right? So imagine if your skin, which is your outermost layer, was 2 feet thick. I mean, it'd be pretty gross, right? But you're probably never going to get a cut ever again because you have such a thick protective layer. That's the same idea for the giant sequoia. It's very thick down low because that's where it's most likely something could impact the tree. Maybe there's a bear scratching away at the bark of the tree. It's okay because the bark's really thick. Maybe there's a fire that's going through the forest. You have to kind of imagine that right now because of all the snow. But imagine there's a fire going through the forest. Most fires, if there's not too much fuel, it's not too windy, it's not too hot and dry, they stay low to the ground. And that's what the giant sequoias are used to. They're used to fires staying pretty low to the ground. If you have bark that's really thick, it's hard for the fire to burn through all of that. So that's pretty good protection. But let's say it's a pretty strong fire and it burns a lot of the bottom, but it doesn't burn the entire top of the tree. Trees are very unlikely to make it through a fire if their entire tops are burned, where their branches and needles or leaves are. But giant sequoia, as long as at least some of the top is left behind and some of the bottom is left behind from a fire, it can survive even that. So I'm showing you a video now of what we call the chimney tree. It's not found in this part of the park. It's found in part of the park called the South Grove, where it's not accessible in the wintertime. So this is a video I took a little while ago. And as you can tell, you can see through the tree going this direction. So that's the forest on the other side. And if you were to stand in the middle of the tree and look up, you could see the sky because it's completely hollowed out from this fire. And yet, this tree, this giant sequoia, is still alive. So we're slowly panning up to the top here, and I'm going to pause the video at the top so you can see the living branches of the tree. All right, so we have this right here and this right here. This tree is still alive and doing its thing even after this really bad burn. And this burn happened a very, very long time ago. And yet this tree is still going through. Not only that, but this tree is also slowly starting to heal itself. So I'm going to circle another portion of the tree, this kind of lighter tan color. That's it slowly starting to close over its wound. Now, I can't tell you how long it's going to take for this to happen. It varies tree to tree, depends on how much water and nutrients, all this other stuff is around. But we have seen trees, not with burns this badly, but with some other burns that have successfully completely sealed over, and you never would have known there was a burn scar underneath it until the tree falls over and then you can see the inside. So it can be successful at healing itself. This one's pretty bad, so I'm not sure if it's going to happen, but it's possible. And this is how giant sequoias can live so long. But they can still die from old age. Usually, it's when they get so huge, they can't handle their own weight. Even then, though, they can kind of figure out a way to stay upright. So we have to consider the weight of the tree. So I want you all now to think about a tower. Think about a really big, heavy tower. And I want you to think about how you would make sure the tower stays upright. What would you do to make sure it's nice and strong? Well, you can use strong building materials. I mean, trees are made out of wood, which is usually a good building material, right? But you also need to think about the shape. A really strong shape is a triangle. And a really famous tower, the Eiffel Tower in Paris, is a good example of this shape, right? If you have a really big bottom, that helps things stay upright even when they're really big and heavy, like a giant sequoia. Now, giant sequoia doesn't have a super skinny top, right? They have branches and needles and things up there, but they do have a really big base. Just in general, the bottom of the tree is pretty wide compared to like the middle. Might be a little hard to tell with this tree with the snow kind of mixing in with the background, but it is wider down low and then gets narrower as it goes up. But the real key here is actually the roots of the tree in the ground. The roots of a giant sequoia spread super far, making a really, really huge base. Now, the biggest I've seen, so this is not the average, this is like the record potentially, it's over 300 feet across, okay? So that means if a giant sequoia was planted in the middle of a football field, its roots can make a touchdown on either side. That's a huge base to help keep this really big, heavy tree upright, and allowed it to get really, really old and get even bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually even all those roots couldn't keep it upright and it might fall over and die from old age. And those roots also, help it get water and nutrients out of the soil. And this doesn't mean that the roots are blocking out access to the other plants. We do have a big variety of other trees around here. And now I'm going to talk about that. But before I do, I first want to launch a poll and get a sense for what you guys think about these adaptations, okay? I want you to vote for which one is your favorite giant sequoia adaptation. Is it the tannins that make it so there's fewer bugs or fungi going after the tree? Is it the really thick bark? Is it that there are so many roots? So go ahead and vote for which one you think is the coolest adaptation. And while you do that, I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see more of what's going on here. And we're going to walk a little further down the park. And again, if you're on YouTube, just go ahead and put in the comments. Is your favorite adaptation the tannins, the thick bark, or the roots extending super duper far to keep the tree upright? All right, I'm going to give you maybe another minute to vote. Which one is your favorite? All right, maybe another 20 more seconds to vote. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And a majority of you actually prefer the roots over the bark or the tannins. That's very interesting because usually more people are into the thick bark than the roots. But it's not too much of a split between the two. And if you voted on YouTube, thank you for that too. I appreciate all of that input. So yeah, giant sequoias have some really wild ways to survive. One thing they have to survive kind of with and against are all the other trees that live in this forest. And a majority of these trees are similar to each other in a way. All of them are conifers. That's Conifer. And conifers have needles. This, for example, is a giant sequoia's needles. You can see they're long, they're skinny, and this is just their version of a leaf. Okay, so they have needles, and these needles are evergreen. It's a little hard to tell because of all the snow around, but they keep their leaves their needles, I should say, year round. That's why they're called evergreens. They don't turn colors in the fall, they keep them. And they also have cones. So cones are where they carry their seeds. Very similar to how a fruit tree carries its seeds inside the fruit. Like if you've ever eaten an apple and there were seeds on the inside, it's the same kind of idea. And the cones can look very, very different from each other. So I'm going to show you now 4 different cones from 4 different kinds of conifers here. I'm going to show them to you all. And then after that, I want you to vote in a poll for which one you think came from the giant sequoia. Okay? So let me introduce you to them. I'm just going to name them by number. We have cone number 1. Okay? Maybe you've seen something kind of similar before. It's kind of spiky, so I'm holding it delicately. That's cone number 1. We have cone number 2. We have this one. Okay? It's like a little ball. Very easy to hold and roll in my hand. That's number 2. We have cone number 3. We have this one, which looks nothing like the other ones, right? It's almost like a little flower, but it's a cone, carries the seeds of its conifer tree. Okay, so that's number 3. And then finally, we have the last one. We have cone number 4. Okay, we have this cone. These are all real cones, all found in the forest here. One of them's a giant sequoia cone. So I'm gonna launch the poll. And I want you all to vote. Which one do you think is the giant sequoia cone? So also on YouTube, we just have 1, 2, 3, or 4. So go ahead and vote, please. And as you're voting, just a quick reminder, right? We have number 1, like this. We have number 2, which is all covered in snow at this point. We have number 2. We have number 3. And we have the last one, number 4. Okay. And again, if you're in a classroom setting and not everyone can vote necessarily, just get whatever the majority is and put in a vote that way. All right. Votes are coming in. I'll give you all maybe another 30 seconds to make a decision. 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right, 5 more seconds. I am going to end the poll and share the results. And a slim majority, well, more than slim, a fair majority said number 4. Second place was number 2. Third place was number 3, fitting. And then the last place was number 1. Okay, so may I have a drum roll, please, for the grand reveal of which cone is the giant sequoia cone? The real giant sequoia cone is number 2. This little guy, it's like a little ball. It's all covered in snow at this point. This is a giant sequoia cone. So that means this cone is the one that carries the seeds of the biggest tree ever, which is extra crazy when you compare it in size to this one. Look at that. But there is a bit of a reason behind the size difference. So I will get to that. And I'll also show you the giant sequoia seed. But before I talk about these two, I want to talk about the other ones, so you're not left hanging and wondering what they are. We had a number of votes for the cone number 3, this one. This is an incense cedar cone. And that's incense, meaning it smells really nice. And this tree right next to me right here is an incense cedar tree. And it is actually a distant relative of the giant sequoia. If the coast redwood is like its sibling, then the incense cedar is its second cousin once removed. Invited to the extended family gatherings, but not really much more than that. So if you voted for this one, I'd say give yourself partial credit because you were close. You were in the extended family. So we had that one. We had no votes for cone number 1. I find that's often the case. This is the ponderosa pine cone. And these are found all over California. So that's why I said maybe you kind of recognize it. A lot of people, when they're thinking of a cone, they often think of immediately a pine cone. We only call pine cones cones that come from pine trees, so like this, but not like the giant sequoia. That's just a cone. But pine cones are the most common ones you might see in like decorations and things like that. So ponderosa pine cone. But let's now talk about the big one, this guy. This is a sugar pine cone. And that's sugar like the stuff inside a candy or inside a fruit. And this is the longest cone of any conifer. So it does indeed, this tree in general breaks records. And this cone is full of really big seeds. Each one of these is called a scale. And at the very tip of each scale is where the seed resides. So we got this big old kind of divot right here. Can fit easily my thumbnail. If I had my thumb out, you'd see that. That's a pretty big seed. And it actually tastes a lot like a pine nut. So you've tasted similar before. And not only do we think that that's tasty, if you like pine nuts, but so do the birds and squirrels that call this place home. This is a big, tasty seed. So I have seen a squirrel tackle a bird bigger than it just to get at one of these cones. It's a very highly desired food source. So they'll take these cones and move them all over the forest. And we think that might be one of the reasons why this cone is so big. It wants to be as appealing as possible to animals, so they'll take it and move it away from the mother tree and disperse the seeds all over the forest. Maybe they'll even bury some of these and forget it, and then that seed is basically already planted. And that's actually the same reason why fruits exist. It's so animals will take the fruit, take the seeds inside, and spread it all around and not leave them all kind of stuck in one spot. So that's why we think this cone is so big. A theory at least. So we have a really big cone with the idea to attract animals. We also have, of course, the really small cone, or at least a smaller cone, the giant sequoia cone. So small cone probably means they're not attracting animals. It instead means it has very small seeds. So each of these little guys is a giant sequoia seed. They're a little bit smaller than an oatmeal flake. About the same shape though. And these want to be as small as possible, so they can also be as lightweight as possible and catch the wind. And that's how they disperse. That's how they move around the forest. Think about it. The cones are at the top of the tree. The top of the tree is what, 275, 300 feet up? When they release these seeds, that's a lot of airspace for the seeds to go down. So these seeds can easily catch the wind and fly all over the place. And that's why we think they're so small. And remember, they have over 3,000 years to live and grow. So it's okay if they start out pretty small. Now, it's no guarantee that all of those seeds are going to make it. In fact, maybe about 1% of all giant sequoia seeds are going to make it. But each cone can have 150 seeds, and each tree can have over 10,000 cones on it. So it's okay in the grand scheme of things that only a few of those seeds are going to make it. But hopefully, one will land on the ground and grow into a pretty big tree. So I'm now going to take you guys over to the remains of what was the biggest tree in this park. I'll tell you the story of what happened to that tree. And some visitors just came on by, so you might see them in the camera. We are open today. The snow doesn't mean we close. The big storm that we're supposed to get starting this afternoon might cause us to close the park. We'll have to see. But for now, visitors are welcome to come and go in the sections that are open. Okay? And right now on the screen, you can see the stump. It's also called the discovery stump or the big stump. Now it's called the discovery stump because it was formerly the discovery tree. So this was actually the first giant sequoia to bring awareness to them nationally, internationally, and that's why I was given that name. Now I stress those, made giant sequoias famous nationally and internationally because they were well known before this tree. They were known by the Native Americans here, the Miwok and the Washoe. They lived amongst these trees for many, many generations. But when new settlers came to the area because of the gold rush, that's when this tree was discovered in 1852 and awareness of giant sequoias spread. And it just so happened that this one was also the biggest one in this forest. Now, with something really big and a name, and it's 1850s, comes people who want to try to make money off of it. And back then, it wasn't really feasible to make money off of people coming here and paying money to see the trees. It's really, really hard for people to travel back in, specifically now, 1853. It's hard to get to California. It's costly, it could cost your life. So if we're gonna make money off of these trees, it makes a lot more sense to cut down the trees, strip them of their bark, and ship them to places all over the world. This happened to a couple trees, and I'm showing you right now a picture of a reassembled giant sequoia in a place called the Crystal Palace in London. There were multiple exhibit halls all over the world that showcase things from all over the world, so people could go, pay some money, go to their local city and see something exotic from another place. And that's what happened to this tree. Now, even though it wasn't an uncommon thing to do back then, that doesn't mean it was a very popular thing to do. As in, a lot of people were upset that this tree was cut down. And it eventually started the movement to protect these trees. It took a very long time. Lots of nonprofit groups started working together. Initially, they tried to make this place actually a national park and not a state park. But in 1931, it finally happened and this place became a state park. And at this point, all of the really old giant sequoias, so we're talking over 1,000 years old, are on protected lands. Because they're, a very remarkable tree and a really ancient tree. We can learn a lot from them. So it's important to protect them and learn the mistakes of the past. Cut down the tree then, let's learn about that now and make sure that doesn't happen again. So now that these folks are done spending their time in the stump, I'm gonna take us on top. So you can get a sense for how big across this tree was. Now, it's been cut down since 1853. So, it's not as wide as it used to be. It's decomposing a little bit, breaking down. It's also had its bark stripped away from it. And if you remember, I told you the bark can be 2 feet thick. So you might want to add about 5 feet or so. But you're on one edge and I'm going to walk to the other side. And as you can see, we're really far away from each other. We're about 25 feet across from each other. So again, maybe 30 feet when the tree was still alive. And this tree was only, I say in quotes, only 1,244 years old. It could have had another 2,000 years left to live. We'll never know for sure how big it could have been. If it was this big at only 1,244 years old, it was growing really fast, really well. So it's really a shame. But again, it's important to remember that we have learned from it. That's kind of what I ask you to take home with you. Cool to learn about giant sequoias, but also it's cool to learn about how in history we make a lot of mistakes. But if we can learn from it, that's really what's key. And we're doing things like that nowadays in the park. We're asking people to leave cones behind. I told you how important they are, so please leave cones behind. Stay on the trail. We're also doing things like prescribed burns in the park that can be beneficial for these trees and for the plants around here. So we're working out a relationship with fire that's maybe best for both us and for the forest overall. As long as we can keep learning and growing, we should be okay. All right. So now, if you've been holding on to some questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. I'll stick around for another few minutes. If there's no more questions, then I'll let you go. And if you need to go anyway, we're just about the 45-minute mark. So take care and thank you so much for joining me. But right now I'm going to hop into the Q&A and see if we have any questions. And I'm going to probably step off of the stump because I see some people coming and I don't want to monopolize the space. Don't want to take over the space. And if you have questions on YouTube, unfortunately, I can't look at them right now. So sorry, but I can't really answer them. All right, I have a question. How far Love Creek from South Grove trees? Ooh, that's a very specific question that I couldn't have top of my head. Love Creek, I know you can access it via our fire roads. And some of the fire roads do go down to the South Grove, but I don't think it gets that close to the South Grove. We also have two creeks, confusingly, they're called Big Tree Creek. So it can be a little difficult to remember the difference between those, how close and far they are from each other. So unfortunately, Lorna Flynn, I can't quite tell you specifically how far Love Creek is. It's been a while since I've been able to explore that part of the park. All right, Kenneth asked, can we walk under an opening of the tree? So we have two trees that you can walk through. One has fallen over. It was called the Pioneer's Cabin tree. That's the one that had a hole carved through it. That fell over a few years ago, about 5-6 years ago. So you can't walk through that one anymore. There is one, though, that you can walk through that fell over and it's been tunneled out from a fire. And you can walk through that one. Right now, though, it's probably completely filled up with snow and ice, so you can't. But any other time of year, you could. Okay, that's called the Father of the Forest. So yes, but no. All right. I'll wait another minute or so, see if we get any other last questions. Are students allowed to visit on a field trip? Yes, absolutely. So we don't accept field trips like during the summer as an official like us guided thing because the summertime is just too busy to accommodate for like camps and things. You're welcome to set one up on your own and come and just tell us about it. But if you want a guided one from us, it has to be during the school year. But yes, absolutely, you can do that. Right now, we're not doing guided field trips because the weather is so bad. Often we can't always let up students anyway. Like this week, no one will be able to come up anyway. But starting in March, we do accept field trips. If you go to bigtrees.org, that's our park partner. They actually help us run that that thing you can sign up for, the field trip. So go to bigtrees.org and they can sign up for a field trip that way. And we accept all grades. So you don't need to worry about that. And if you also just want to come up on your own without us guiding it, there's an option for a self-guided option versus a guided option. You're very welcome. We do occasionally get outdoor schools who come through here too, but they do their own thing. All right, y'all. I do need to get going. I actually have a program specifically with just one classroom in just a few minutes. A little more than that. I have a little bit of wiggle room. So thank you all so much for joining me. Again, this program is recorded and has been live streamed on YouTube. So if you want to come back and relook at some things and maybe try to pick up some more nuggets of information, you can go to the California State Parks Ports YouTube channel and see a recording of this program. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a good rest of your day. And also stay safe. We're supposed to all get a lot of rain in California. Bye all.